wonder if there's like a joke PragerU video to watch or something. Does Israel occupy the West Bank? Oh, this is going to be really funny. This one sounds great.
How many times have you heard that Israel occupies the West Bank? Probably more times than you can count. But have you ever asked yourself whether it's true, or even what it means? Let's do so now in the most objective way possible.
The most objective way possible on Prager University. Oh.
That is, in the way that all territorial questions everywhere else in the world are resolved. To do this, we must look at the law. But first, we need a little history. Up until 100 years ago, the area is now called...
Let's look at the law, okay? I mean, there's not even like an international law question on whether the West Bank is occupied. It's not even a question. It is occupied. And now the questions are about, are they following the law in the occupied territory? Like, this video is like taking it like so far back, it has been occupied. Everyone knows it's occupied. UN legal experts say that not just are they occupying the West Bank, but they are violating international law for what you're allowed to do during an occupation because they're creating settlements under their occupation. It's occupied. It's essentially governed. Like there's Israeli troops do whatever the fuck they want there. They are the ultimate authority. They have the ultimate monopoly on violence in the West Bank.
Feels like he supports the Holocaust.
Communism
is
is based...
incredibly occupied. They're fucking illegally settling it. Amazing stuff.
Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, and all...
Like, most fucking Israelis probably think it's occupied. Most Israelis don't just think it's occupied. They think it's occupied and they want to annex it. It's so occupied, it's so fucking occupied, that Israeli politicians, the ex-Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, was proposing annexing parts of it. That's how occupied it is. You can't propose to annex something that you don't have occupied, or at least if you don't plan to occupy it in the future. But obviously they're already occupying it. They fucking know that they're occupying it. Over the last half century, 450,000 Israeli settlers have built homes in the West Bank. It's not occupied, but there's almost 500,000 Israeli settlers there. Holy shit, like, this is a completely untenable argument. This is not even an argument. Then they're not even arguing, is Israel, like, violating law regarding what you're allowed to do during an occupation? They're arguing that it's not occupied.
The countries around them.
That is incredible.
Were part of the Ottoman Empire, which ruled over a vast area and many peoples. Neither the Jews, nor those Arabs we now call Palestinians, had a state, though the Jews had a nationalist movement calling for one. Everything changed after World War I. The Ottomans fought on the losing side with Germany. By the end of the war in 1918, their empire had disintegrated, leaving the British and French in control of much of its territory. In earlier times, the victors would likely have kept this land as colonies for themselves, but there was a new spirit of democracy in the air. The Allies, including the British, French, and Americans, agreed that the former Ottoman lands should be allowed to become...
That's it. It was just a spirit of democracy in the air, nothing else.
...independent nation-states. After the war, the nations of the world created the League of Nations, a precursor to the United Nations. Meeting in San Remo, Italy...
I mean, if it's a question of law, why is he not talking about the law? Because you don't need to go over the history, you just look at the law, right?
In 1920, they set up what was known as the Mandate System. The colonies of the defeated powers, Germany and the Ottoman Empire, were converted into distinct geopolitical entities, which became the countries now known as Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. None of this is controversial. There was one other mandate issued, the Mandate for Palestine. Now, Palestine was merely a geographic label, the name the Romans gave the Jewish kingdom of Judea after they conquered it.
Oh, it's just a geographic label. That's how it works, right? Like, there's never been, like a people from a region who've ever been named after the region that they live in. That's never happened before. The United States of America is a mere geographic label. Americans don't exist.
There was nothing exclusively Arab about it. The mandate provided that Palestine would become a national home for the Jewish people.
No, it didn't. Like, all of Palestine?
There was a simple reason for this. The League recognized that Jews were the indigenous people of the area.
That's really funny. They're making, like, PragerU making an argument based on indigenous people. They were so indigenous that the population before mass settlement began was like 2 or 3% of the overall population. You know, if there's 2 or 3% of people in some way share a religion of you, that makes you indigenous. That's how it works. I'm going to convert to Islam right now and go and fucking decolonize Morocco. That's how this works.
All the mandatory territories in the Middle East transitioned to statehood in the 1930s and 40s, with Israel the last to do so, declaring independence in May 1948. Now, we...
Just like, skips everything, right? There's no like mass settlement, people coming in from Europe and other parts of the world to settle in this place on stolen land. Nothing like that. They were all just already there, according to this guy, basically. The Jewish population of Israel, Palestine, went from like 2% to like 30% over the course of like 50 years. So I wonder where they came from. They must have just had tons of babies. Some Jews were indigenous there, but most of the people who, like, when the states were split into Palestine and Israel, most of the Jewish people there were definitely not indigenous. Only a small percentage.
Get to the legal stuff. What were the borders of the State of Israel when it declared independence? International law has a simple and universally applicable rule for determining borders of new countries. It's called the uti possidetis juris principle. Lawyers love Latin phrases. The rule provides that when a new country is created, its borders match the borders of the previous geopolitical entity in that territory. For example, the borders of Ukraine.
Except the borders of Israel and Palestine did not match the borders of the previous geopolitical entity because it was split incredibly arbitrarily and unjustly between people who already live there and a population that did not already live there beforehand because they had moved very recently. So this guy's appealing to a principle that doesn't make sense to apply here at all because the borders were essentially split completely fucking arbitrarily.
And Azerbaijan.
Based on what one side wanted with no consent at all, not even consulting with the other.
Are exactly what they were when they were parts of the Soviet Union. Other considerations, such as demographics.
Like, yeah, it's not occupied because it was technically a part of the Mandate of Palestine before the mandate was split into two states arbitrarily by foreign imperialist powers without any input from the people who had actually lived there continuously for centuries. Therefore, it's not occupied. That is completely nonsensical.
Are not taken into account. Because without a simple, easily applied rule, a new country's borders would never be settled. A recipe for permanent conflict. Applying this rule to Israel means that it had sovereign claims to all of Jerusalem, Judea and Samaria, and Gaza, because those were its borders according to the Mandate of Palestine.
He's literally arguing that essentially Israel has the right to take any part of Palestine, any part of it, because the Mandate of Palestine was all of Palestine. Therefore, it's all Israel. It can't occupy any of it. It can do whatever it wants. There's no occupation. This is such a funny argument. It's so fucking dumb. It's just self-evidently stupid. Like, not even people who support the existence of Israel could possibly find this to be tenable. This is even dumber than I thought it could possibly be. This guy is one of the dumbest morons imaginable. Wow, this is amazing.
To be sure, the United Nations proposed a resolution in 1947 with different borders and a much smaller area for a Jewish state. But that resolution was a non-binding recommendation, nothing more. It did not have the force of law. We know what happened next. Upon declaring independence, Israel was immediately invaded by 5 Arab armies seeking to destroy it.
So wait, if it declared independence, did it declare independence across all of the Mandate of Palestine or only across the partitioned territory? Because I'm pretty sure it's the latter. So this is an official Israeli government website on the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence states outright that they declared independence based on the UN partition plan. Right here. It's there in the text. So his argument is completely untenable. Not even the state of Israel believed that it had sovereignty over the entire former Mandate of Palestine. He's appealing to a completely non-existent notion. He just invented something, basically completely. They didn't declare independence over the entire Mandate of Palestine, and that would be very incredibly stupid if they did, and still not legitimize his argument. But they didn't, so his argument is wrong.
Israel survived, but Jordan managed to seize parts of Jerusalem, as well as Judea and Samaria, which it dubbed the West Bank. All the Jews living in these areas were expelled, or to use the contemporary term, ethnically cleansed. Here, we need to...
Most of them were not expelled, they left. Do you know what areas were ethnically cleansed, also genocided? The Palestinian ones.
Introduce another key principle of international law. A war of aggression cannot be used to change another country's borders. Israel...
It's not a war of aggression because the Palestinians were not party to the partition plan. They didn't want the land to be divided. So they were defending their territory against a foreign imposition. Oh, the UN, which at the time was essentially a fucking arm of the US and Europe, said that the land is ours now, so it's ours, ha 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 ha. after we fucking incessantly lobbied the member states to vote in our favor. They said it's ours now, so it's ours. Haha. No, that's not how it works. It's self-determination. The people actually live there. You can't just split up a country without the consent of most of the people who live there, which is what they did here.
Israel and Jordan signed an armistice agreement in 1949, an agreement to temporarily stop fighting. This truce had no legal effect on borders. When Israel liberated these territories in 1967 during the Six-Day War, it was retaking its own land. You can't occupy land that belongs to you.
This is like such a dumb argument. It's genuinely funny.
So where are we now? In 1994, the Palestinian Authority was established as part of the Oslo Accords. Israel didn't have to agree to this, but it did. While not being a sovereign state, the PA operates independently of Israel. The PA, not Israel, governs the lives of Palestinians.
Can you explain why there's Israeli troops in the West Bank, then patrolling the streets, raiding houses, attacking people? Why there's 500,000 Israeli settlers there if it's not an occupation? I'd be very interested.
Israel has offered the Palestinians a fully independent state on several occasions. Each time, the Palestinians have rejected the offer, something no
because you stole their entire land.
other national independence movement in modern times has done.
That's because no other national independence movement has had more than half of its land stolen. So yeah, generally, I imagine if you stole half that land, they will be much more reluctant to accept the terms of the imperialist power.
Whether or not it makes sense for Israel to renew such offers is an open question, but it's under no legal obligation to do so. I'm Eugene Kontorovich, professor of law at Georgia.
Eugene Kontorovich, you're very stupid and your argument is dumb. I mean, what did I expect from PragerU? That's about the extent of it. Can't complain. I got what I was looking for, but yeah, that was incredibly dumb. Israel owns all of Palestine according to this guy, ergo it can't occupy it. He makes that argument and then he goes on to say, well anyway, so the Palestinians control the West Bank. Israel has nothing to do with it. So he's appealing to two completely different and contradictory notions. They're not occupying the West Bank because it's Israeli anyway, and two, they're not occupying the West Bank because the Palestinians rule it. The first one is a false statement, obviously. The second one is also a false statement. Like, the West Bank is under martial law of a foreign enforced by a foreign army, by the IDF. So, honestly, what a joke. You know, this is definitely me. When I'm not occupying a place, you know, I'm not occupying it. It's under the control of the Palestinian Authority. I'm going to send 3 battalions of my army there. I'm not occupying it. It's very normal when it's actually under the jurisdiction and authority of a foreign power to just like send 3 battalions of, for a belligerent power to just send 3 battalions of its army there. That happens all the time. It's not an occupation. It's normal. No occupation. Anyway, that was so fucking dumb. That was brain dead. What did I expect? PragerU. I got what I was looking for.